Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
This is Phil Treiber, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
If this is your first time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity, episode 218 for June 14th, 2023. This is the second episode with Phil Treiber, where we got into all kinds of stuff about manhood, men and emotions. And it's just been a real pleasure working with Phil, doing this, and I'm hoping we've been talking about collaborating on another project. I think we'll probably get started with that pretty soon. I'll keep you guys posted with that. Got some t-shirts on TeePublic now. Working on all kinds of stuff there. There's a link in the show notes. And plenty of other good stuff coming. So anyway, hope you enjoy the rest of this. Phil Treiber.
My first year of sobriety, when I was hardcore with Chris R. and the militant 12-step wielding the book as a weapon, right? As opposed to now where I'm much more laissez-faire, be like, all right, man, like you get it or you don't. That's okay.
It's a process, man. And we get what we need when we need it. We do.
I needed that back then. I needed that hardcore, dichotomous, this is the way. Right. And thank God I met those guys in my early days, because they set up me on a foundation to where a lot of those guys are still with us. They're doing the deal. Guys have moved on in their lives and are across the country and returned home and moved. And there's guys down here that are still carrying the cross and the message, and they're doing the deal.
There's a screw for every knot, man.
Yep.
There is. And, whatever it is, it's like, one of the things that I've always said in, working in the field is that maybe I haven't always said, I've said in the last decade and a half probably is, I don't care how you get sober. I care that you get sober.
Right.
It doesn't make any difference to me. I just want you to have a better life.
Man. And that's what I think approach that I've really taken with my guys. And because of course, when I was working in treatment, I was at a facility that had a very heavy 12-step presence, which had faded over the years, in favor of clinical and growth. But when I came into my private practice and really when I opened up Dude Breathe, I can't tell you the relief that I hear from some guys' voice on the phone, because I'm open. I say, listen, I identify as a person in long-term recovery. And I say to them in the initial consultation call, when they say that they're struggling with substances, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, listen, dude, like my job is not to convince you into the rooms. It's not to convince or shove something down that worked for me, or I know it was worked for other people, down your throat. And they're like, thank God, man. Like, thank you. Mm-hmm. And I always preface that. I say, like, listen, we can try any way you want to. But I'm going to say, like, hey, there might be a time if we continue working together that, like, hey, man, you've tried it this way, that way, that way. Like, maybe it's time to be open to that different experience.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, hey, man, I really appreciate that, because the way that I describe therapy to my guys is that, you know, you're paying me as the expert to guide you on you, who you are the expert on.
Right.
Right. Like we're walking a path together in the dark. I'm standing behind you with the flashlight, showing you the path. You got to walk it.
Right.
But the same thing, man, if you see a different way that you see on that path, man, let me know.
You got to figure out a way that works for you.
Right.
And that is sustainable. It's like when people have the New Year's resolutions and they're going to go to the gym every day.
Yeah.
And people tell you to set, attainable goals. Like, what will you follow through if you go twice a week? Do what you're going to be able to keep doing, that you're going to be willing to keep doing.
I do a lot of goal setting stuff with my guys, right? Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of research on all this stuff for my own personal development that I bring in to work with them. And I have them set goals, and I set them up purposely because they come back with really crappy goals. But then I showed them like how to make them like through the smarter framework, and actually like, hey, this may work for you, but you got to actually figure out what that looks like. Because the thing is, that's like where I think that like in the beginning, same thing as my development as a man in recovery, it was the same thing as my development as a clinician, right? Like I always like the same thing. I wanted a clear cut solution. Mm-hmm. And for me, that came from a specific 12-step fellowship. I needed that in the beginning, but it's the same thing in my development as a therapist, right? I wanted to find my theory, my approach. I wanted to find the one thing that would work for everybody and everything. And I drank some of the Kool-Aid, right? Like I remember, man, I had the opportunity to do my EMDR training in the beginning, like as a student, and I got the nonprofit discount, and I drank that Kool-Aid for a little while, right? I was like, this is the answer. This is the research, et cetera, et cetera. But then once I actually got out, like I was like, this isn't me,
man,
right? And that's where I think, where I have done advanced trainings and a number of different approaches to where I use the inner child work. I use a lot of CBT therapy. I use the higher level thought, philosophical jumping jacks with guys that really want to go that way. And then more recently, I'm really leaning into, much more of the internal family system stuff. Because I think it's important to have multiple tools to approach.
Well, it's because it doesn't matter what you think works. It matters what works for them, right?
Yeah.
That's the point,
Yep. And that's the different approaches. Like some guys are very much more like the traditional masculine role, and they're not going to be down with the heady, experiential inner child stuff. So then we got to go, much more behavioral and challenging their thought patterns, and they need a lot of homework. And then I have other guys who are tapped into that other side to where I haven't given them a single piece of homework.
Yeah.
But we come in and we dive like head first into the mythology, the symbolism, the spirituality, the philosophical thought. And they benefit from it greatly from just gaining insight from just traditional talk therapy.
Yeah.
But you gotta have multiple tools in the toolbox. And that's the same thing I think as I get older in my sobriety, in the past 3 years, I think, the universe or great spirit and my higher power has brought guys into my life that already have a couple of years under their belt. And they come to me for a higher level of guidance along, their journey. And we do a lot of spiritual work. It's not so much of the, the steps so much, but it is much more of the, hey man, what are you doing for you? How are you practicing self-care? How are you expanding out your spiritual life? How are you expanding out your relationships, your career, your growth in all areas, not just one specific one? You need a lot of tools to do that.
Yeah. For me, I had the same, very similar experience where I had a lot of shame 3, 5, 7 years into recovery because I wasn't taking people through the steps. The guys who I had sponsored, I did take people through the 12 steps, but like that wasn't my thing. And what ended up starting to happen after a few years is that the guys who'd already been through the steps with somebody else would come to me when their girlfriends were ready to kill them.
Yep.
Or they were on the verge, like they were like having problems in relationships, and those guys were coming to me for help.
Right.
And it gave me a lot of peace because, this is where I fit. This is,
And that's it. Yeah. I mean, that peace place, you're right. But it's like, it reminds me of that. Are you familiar with the term ikigai?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a big, I mean, like I said before, I'm a voracious reader, but I've been digging deep into the Bushido Code, feudal Japanese history, reading books, Obunaga Hideyoshi, like digging hard into that. And I just picked up a book about Ikigai, and I've been having these. And if I was talking to a young lady who's a psychologist down here, we're no longer seeing each other, but she was brilliant. And she challenged my whole idea of the self-actualization of like Maslow's, pyramid. And I was like, it's not possible. It's not possible to self-actualize. That means perfection, et cetera, et cetera. But the way that she framed it to me was that in these moments, we can feel in place. It clicks. And I've experienced that in session with guys. I've experienced that when, after a meditation, I've experienced that to where like I was in my cold plunge, 2 days ago, and just like in that extreme discomfort, but like having my breathing, tapping in to where it's like, this is where I'm supposed to be in these little moments of this is what it is. That ikigai, that passion. And I think with me running the business and providing therapy to guys, but then also like I really thoroughly enjoy it as a passion to where I never want to retire. I still like
it doesn't feel like work. That's what I'm feeling that when I do this now, like unless I'm self-conscious about it. Right.
Yeah.
But that's what started to happen when I started to do this podcast. Is it blew me away because I didn't expect it. It felt like doing group with guys. That's what.
People like when I date like girls or people ask me, they're like, oh, like what you do must be so difficult, and hearing traumas and everything else. Like I tell people, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've heard everything.
Right.
I've literally heard in session everything you possibly can think of in movies and TV and overdoses and sexual abuse and horrific things.
Right.
But it doesn't. And I think it's also, I just have been trained and I've really developed some really healthy boundaries around these things, but it's not work. I go to work, I run my business. I just expanded to a little bit of a group practice, and it's not work. I'm not dreading going into the office. I'm not dreading, well, sometimes I dread certain sessions, right? But it's not work. I'm not punching the clock. It's something that feeds my soul. That I want to be like Yalamet. Yeah, like at like 94 years old.
Yeah, well, it's sacred.
Yeah.
It's sacred, man. It really is. It is.
It's such a gift. It's such a gift.
And that's important to remember that, It's important to remember that. And I just saying it, like I feel that way. I think it. But it was one of those, moments. Like this is being in a position where people come to you to help them change the course of their lives.
It's such a responsibility and a privilege.
It is totally.
I remember when I was doing my internship, and of course, like I was working full time while I was doing my master's degree, grinding it out. And I had been working as a case manager at a detox down here for almost, I'd left Next Chapter and started my job there about 3 months and maybe a semester or two into my schooling, probably a semester. And so I was like already providing quote unquote care to people, right? I was running interventions. I was empathizing. I was really helping people when they were at their absolute worst. And I had a lot of, cutting my teeth in detox in school, learning the clinical side of things. I remember like we took a class and like assessments about like, and they were like, this is what a biopsychosocial is. And I was like, I do 8 of those a week, right? Already. I was like, this is like, I know this, right? Like I know about harm assessments. I knew about all the interventions and stuff, but then in my internship, when I actually sat down to provide individual therapy to someone, because I went to an amazing place down here in Florida, which was like a teaching place where they literally, it's like, okay, you have clients, have at it, bud. Like, I got real world experience with a variety of different clients. There were times I remember sitting across from the client, times where, of course, imposter syndrome, like the little voice in my head is like, what in God's name are you doing?
Right.
You can't help these people. But there were times where they would come back with these little interventions, not so much from school, but from my own personal life and my history and my experience being in therapy and being in recovery, and just being able to actually empathize and listen to people, that they were actually experiencing change. And of course, ego came into it, like, oh, look at how great I'm doing. Look at, all this work that I'm doing with people. But it really was them doing the work. I was just offering some suggestions 50 minutes a week, and them transitioning that into their lives, and their lives got better. And it was such a privilege. And I was like,
Well,
okay,
we get to watch, man.
yep,
We get to
this
watch.
is what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
This is what I'm supposed to do. Right. And there's nothing greater that I love than a guy who graduates. He's like, hey, man, like, I think we can take a break. And I can honestly say within myself, yeah, dude, I think we can.
Yeah.
Right. Go spread your wings, see how it goes. And then I'm here. Right. And then they come back like, hey, dude, I missed you. Let's meet every 3 weeks. Let's chop it up. Let's see if we can perfect this thing a little bit more and more. And I'm like, all right, man, I'm game.
I'll tell you, one of the really big experiences of gratitude that I had was, I was at that same place we were talking about where, your facility was sending guys, and it wasn't one of those guys, but there was a client who I was working with, and he just got there, and, he was on my caseload, and, I was meeting with him once a week and just getting to know him and hearing his story. And he started to say things that were like, oh my God, this is me.
Oh.
And he was the age I was when I got sober.
Mm-hmm.
And he was heartbroken. And, he had been emotionally abused by an older brother. And he had accepted responsibilities in his life, in a sort of a caretaking thing for his parents. Yeah.
Yep.
And I did all that. I had all that stuff happen. And his brother, he was talking about his brother, and just like, I could see the hurt. And I remember saying to him, I bet you looked up to him and wanted to be just like him. And you wanted to bash his head in with a baseball bat all at the same time.
Yep.
And he said, yes.
You understood.
Yeah. And he's like, and the next thing I said is, that's okay. It's normal. Like, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's perfectly normal for you to feel that way. And I felt it too.
That normalizing, that realness, that real recognizes real, as the kids would say today. Maybe they don't anymore. I don't know. But yeah, when we can connect on that human level and know, and for me as a clinician, right, is that a guy can come into session like that. And because one of the things that I don't do is that I do not do a biopsychosocial with my guys. Right. I mean, that's literally, some people would say it's unethical because I don't have the background stuff, but when it comes to men, it's the last frickin' thing that they want to do and come in, right? To talk about that stuff. It's the last thing. I can pull that out myself through my skill set over time, right? But when they come in and they're bashing their head against the wall, they're trying to fit the square peg in the round hole. They're at their wit's end with their partner. Their partner, most of the time, is at their wit's end with them because they're coming to me 8 months too late, right? Is that they're like, they tell me exactly what they're experiencing. And because of my life experiences, but then also my vast experience as a clinician in a variety of different roles, there's this joy and this excitement that I have inside. And I'll even start smiling at them in session. And they're kind of taken aback by it, but it's also my personality, because I curse a lot in session. I bust chops. I use a lot of humor, right? But I start smiling, and like once in a while, a guy like, because I'll let them finish, right? But they're like, why are you smiling at me?
Right.
And I was like, dude, nothing that you have told me right here is something that I don't have experience in, or I haven't guided guys to resolve in the past. It's okay. This is not a unique experience. Of course, it's unique and it's your valid experience, but I got you.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's okay. Right. Like, and I'm saying, like, and it doesn't relieve their, tension or, pain immediately, but there is some relief coming from them knowing that, like, again, because I'm building the rapport, and that therapeutic alliance is so important with men. Arguably, it's the most important thing possible outside of technique. But knowing, like, hey, dude, like, yeah, man, like, I know this path. I've done this countless times before. And they're like, okay, what do we got to do?
Yeah.
Right. And I can lay it out there. And of course, I leave out some certain things, and not like I'm lying to them, but I'm like, yeah, this is going to require some inner child. There's some feelings and emotions work. Like, we're going to have to get uncomfortable and get weird with it. But I was like, yeah, dude, like, listen, man, if you take my suggestions and you walk that path, you're going to be okay. And even if it doesn't turn out the way that you want it to, you're still going to be okay.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, folks, Tom here. I want to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to my Substack publication. The original purpose for creating this podcast was to cultivate an audience for my writing, and I'm publishing now more than ever. I'm sharing free content every week with commentary on personal growth, emotional literacy, men's issues, relationships, and more, as well as audio content for paid subscribers. Please check it out by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting tgentry@substack.com. It's nice to hear how committed you are to being gender responsive, essentially.
Yeah.
When I started my career, my first full-time job as a tech was on the women's unit at Hanley. And it's just the way it happened. At that time, they hired Stephanie Covington, who wrote the book A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps, in this trauma-informed curriculum, which wasn't a thing people said back then, trauma-informed.
Now it's everywhere.
Yeah, but not then. But she wrote this curriculum called Helping Women Recover. They bought it. She trained all the staff. I had to train with her, I was one of the only 2 guys even allowed on the unit.
I love that. Yeah.
And, there have been guys out there there have been programs that have come around to treat men specifically. But there's the people like you, there are a lot more of us now than there were. And just the approach that you're talking about, the way, you're really trying to connect with guys the way guys need to connect instead of whatever else. And you were talking about the language earlier, which is something that I feel really strongly about. I've written about.
Yeah.
And it's just so important, man. If we want guys to get better, we can't talk to guys like we talk to women. It's just not going to work. And I think this field, at least in my experience, has been so dominated by females. There aren't that many male therapists out there. They're hard to find.
I know. I get a lot of calls.
Just because you're a guy, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So you think about that. And then, listen, I love Brene Brown. Like, I wish she was my big sister, dude. I really do. I think she's awesome. And it's because the way she's articulated things, it's a message that can permeate like everyone. And so many more people understand personal growth stuff now than did before.
You're right.
So many more people. And also that word vulnerability.
That's a dirty word in the men's world.
It's thrown around all the time. And I wrote a piece about this, how we say you have to be vulnerable. You have to be vulnerable. Well, if you go back and you really look at the work she did, that's not all she said. What she said is that in order to connect, depth of connection, in order to really connect with another human being in the way that we deep down is our true heart's desire, in order to actually do that, we have to be willing to experience some measure of vulnerability. That's what she's talking about. She's not talking about let your guard down all the time.
No.
And you know, what's even worse is it's like bait for certain guys out there to say they want us to be weak. They want us to be just like women.
The sissifying, you know, because that's the thing I've gotten a lot, like on my Instagram, I've released a lot of videos about mindful masculinity and the problems with masculinity today. And I'm actually probably going to film another reel soon about toxic masculinity because my feelings towards that label and phrase have changed over the past year. But it's not about sissifying or making men effeminate,
No.
right? But that's the thing is, like, if you look at the work of Terry Real, who does he's a men's issues guy and a couples guy. You know, he did a lot of his work with Pia as well, and then he was spun off and kind of did his own thing with it. But that vulnerability aspect is something that is like, yes, it's inherent to our, you know, our humanity, right? As Terry talks about the great cleaving of anything that is perceived as feminine, and then we're left with just the role of our masculinity. But it's about knowing when to be vulnerable and when not to be, when it's appropriate and when it's not.
Well, and here's where I go with it, and that I think back to the language. What are we really saying? If I'm telling you, if I'm using that language, you have to be vulnerable. What I'm really saying to you, what I'm asking you to do is to exercise enough courage to actually be real.
Right.
That's what it is. That, I mean, do you know a guy who's not going to be challenged by that? They're so much more likely to respond to, can you be courageous?
Because that actually taps into a lot of the masculine ideal.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It does. And it works. It works.
And that's the whole idea with the wording that we use. But it's not just the phrasing and the wording that we use, because I think, well, first off, with the men's issue stuff, I had to do this all on my own. I was not taught this in school.
Yeah.
Right. You know, that's the thing is, like, even in the sociocultural class, and that's the thing is, like, I felt like the enemy as a cisgender white male, right? Surrounded by, you know, every color and, you know, creed and sexual orientation. I'm sitting there and it was just like, it felt like we were just bashing white men. And I understand that. I get that. Right. You know, and the patriarchy and all that. But then I had to really dig into these things myself when it came to the men's issues, but then do the research to where, like, I'm literally in the middle of developing a training for therapists and organizations to better approach men, because we do not do a good job of it. Right. Yeah. I mean, what happens, you know, guy goes into therapy, if we even get a man, you know, or someone who identifies as man or male onto the couch, right? What's the first question that a therapist is going to ask him? How are you feeling?
Right.
And what the fuck am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
Right. What am I supposed to do with that?
I'm okay.
Right?
I'm good. Yeah. Fine.
Yeah, exactly. To where, like, literally, you know, like with there's this clinical, and this is empirically founded, called normative male alexithymia. Right. So we know alexithymia is a person is completely disconnected with their emotions and feelings, as well as the physical sensations in their bodies. They appear wooden-like. Right. They're unable to express and feel emotion.
Normative
male alexithymia, to where it's not normative as if it's normal, but it's so standardized that these researchers, saw that on average, men are not able to identify the feelings that they're experiencing.
Yeah.
Therefore, when, like, they're not able to open up to their partner in a relationship, they're not able to be, that dirty V word, vulnerable, or, express themselves, and their partner gets mad at them. Why are you so cold? Why can't you share these things with me? Is because of a lot of different aspects.
Yeah, that's the other part. If you really loved me.
Right. Meanwhile, you're literally, asking this guy to do the impossible for him.
Right.
Because it does go down to the socialization process. It's nature and nurture, right? There is some type of biological piece to it, right? To where I was listening to this British psychotherapist who started the division of the British APA, the British Psychological Associations. We here in the APA in the States, their divisions over there, they're like chapters of the men's issue stuff. And he was talking about the biological reasons of potentially why us men do not want to express things. Because, back when we were hunting or warring or anything else like that,
we had to be
right?
focused, man. We had to kill the saber-toothed tiger.
Right. If I lean over to the guy next to me, he's like, hey, man, I'm really afraid of dying. I don't think this is going to go very well. That could have had profound experiences. But it does go down to the socialization aspect to where, between the ages of 4 and 6, boys and girls have the same level of emotional bandwidth.
Right.
After the age of 6, it just tanks for boys because of the socialization process. Hey, be a big boy. Boys don't cry.
Right.
And if we show emotion or show weakness or, anything else like that, or if we're vulnerable in the playground, we get targeted.
Have you heard of Bell Hooks, the feminist writer Bell Hooks?
Maybe.
She died during COVID, and prominent feminist, right? She wrote a book called The Will to Change. And it's about men and helping men love.
Right.
And she talks about, in her life experience, growing up next to a brother, that what you just described. And she talks about how we all, as men, go through this. We all go through this.
Yeah.
Almost invariably. And she refers to men as divided souls.
That's the great cleaving.
Yeah.
That's the thing. We're not embracing our full humanity. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Right. And that's how I knew about Terrence Real, because she cites a lot of his work and stuff. That book, dude, The Will to Change.
Yeah. Because I've done a number of Terry's trainings. Yeah. I haven't done the full relational life. I don't, because it's mostly couples work. But I've done a lot of his other things through his website. And then also through some little smaller things through Pessy as I was embracing and starting this journey. But it's true, because we're literally taught to cleave off and push away anything that could be feminine, which is,
right. And
not feminine as in gender, but anything deemed as feminine, such as compassion, empathy, feelings, and emotions, to where the working theory, right? There's no true evidence behind this, but the mechanism behind the normative male alexithymia, which is a mouthful. One theory is because the socialization process is that we're taught not to express or identify feelings and emotions, is that our limbic system and our emotional center of our brain does not have the proper connections to our cortex or our neocortex, which are able to logic and rational and identify these things within ourselves. The other theory is that we were never able to develop the verbal coding to actually link a sensation or feeling and a physical sensation inside to the actual emotional intelligence or the emotional language of feelings and emotions verbiage. So literally when the therapist and a guy's struggling in life and he sits down on the couch and the therapist asks him, how are you feeling? A lot of times there is this frustration or this anger because, one, it's the same thing that his partner or family or friends are asking him. He doesn't have a response to it. And there's this bound up energy inside of I don't know.
Right.
Why do you ask me that?
I mean, I can totally relate to that. I'm sure you can too, yeah. Right? I mean, it's this, it's like an angst.
Exactly. I used to have a therapist ask me, hey, how you feeling? When I was in treatment years ago. And I said, I felt shitty. And he would say, shitty's not a feeling.
Yeah.
Right. But it comes down to the work with men is that a lot of it is a lot of affect work.
Yeah.
right? When I start talking about something, I'm really hyper focused on being in the room and being present there. And if I see a shift in body language or, the eye contact or anything else like that, I'm like, okay, what's that?
Yeah.
And I actually like literally do some somatic work to be like, okay, where is it in your body?
Right.
And they're able to kind of pull that apart, but they're not able to put the actual words to it. But of course, I'm not doing that first or second session. That's down the road when there's actually a rapport built and they're feeling much more comfortable in the therapy room. Right.
A lot of this newest Brene Brown book, and I watched the HBO series that she did. She talks about, there's a lot of research out there about the importance of having the language in order to have the emotional experience, that we need to have the language first.
Yeah, it's EQ. It's all emotion. If you read a lot of the men's books, like Working with Men in Therapy, Breaking Barriers, a lot of these things that I've dug into significantly, it's all about emotional intelligence and actually having to teach and guide men to develop this emotional intelligence so that, one, they can actually interact with the people in their lives that way.
Yeah.
We know that EQ is a much better indicator for children than IQ. And the thing is that men, boys are not developed to manifest and learn what EQ is. And then we have the issues in society that we have.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, I could go on and on. I got a pack. I'm going to Chicago in the morning.
No, what a gift.
There's so much more I want to talk about.
Yeah, I could do this for another 3 hours. Easy.
I want you to listen to this minute. Thanks for listening to the show. Please subscribe, leave a rating or a review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can learn more about my other podcasts by visiting thepathtooauthenticity.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. Music is by the band Punk Rock Opera, used under a Creative Commons license and with permission from the artist. The show is produced by me, Tom Gentry. You can find more of my work on Substack, including a podcast only available to paid subscribers. So again, thanks for listening. Keep coming back. Be nice.
did great, honey.